Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. I'm really excited to bring you today's video. If you enjoy my content, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. Let's get started. The year 1912 marked a significant turning point in Antarctic exploration. Many explorers were eager to uncover this remote and harsh continent, but none were as brave and determined as Douglas Mawson. Mawson, an Australian geologist and explorer, saw Antarctica not only as a geographical area to explore, but also as an opportunity for scientific curiosity and making history. The main goal of the expedition was to conduct extensive scientific research in the interior regions of Antarctica. Mawson aimed to understand the continent's geography, minerals, climate, and ecosystems, contributing to the world of science. However, this exploration was not limited to studying natural resources. Mawson also wanted to observe the movements of glaciers and map the unknown areas deep within the continent. Mawson's expedition was organized by the Royal Geographical Society of Australia in 1911. Mawson meticulously prepared for this great journey. He knew the expedition needed to be multifaceted, involving both geological and biological research. Leading such a project required great responsibility and posed significant challenges, but Mawson willingly embraced this burden. Before embarking on the journey, he contacted many experienced explorers and scientists for advice. He also selected team members who were trained in survival and capable of enduring Antarctica's harsh conditions. Mawson formed a 4-person core team for the expedition. Among the team members were Mawson's close friend and experienced explorer Xavier Mertz, along with 2 other researchers. The team also included a group of dogs, which helped transport the necessary equipment and food supplies. Given Antarctica's harsh climate, every detail was carefully planned, and the preparation was flawless. In November 1912, Mawson and his team set off from Australia to Antarctica aboard the ship Aurora. The journey began with difficult sea conditions and high waves. However, Mawson and his team overcame these challenges and, after several weeks, reached the Antarctic coastline. Their goal was to venture far from the settlements and conduct in-depth scientific research in the interior of Antarctica. The team's first stop was the Cape Denison region along the coast of the continent. There they decided to establish a secure base camp to begin their research. This base would also serve as a storage area for the supplies necessary for the team's survival. Setting up the camp was a difficult process. Antarctica's freezing cold and fierce winds hindered every step. However, Mawson and his team overcame these obstacles with determination and discipline. The team constructed large tents, sturdy shelters, and snow passages for their camp. During the long time they would spend here, they would face a constant battle for survival. Mawson had meticulously planned every detail for advancing into the interior of the continent. After setting up the camp, preparations began for the next stages of the expedition. The team set out on foot to conduct research, collect samples, and gather scientific data. Additionally, they would map the glaciers and collect geographical data. Mawson was determined to understand nature, study the local ecosystems, and make new discoveries at every step. However, despite the promising start and careful planning, they were unaware of the disasters that awaited them. At first, everything went well, but the first serious challenges began to emerge just a few weeks later. Despite the successful start of the expedition, Mawson would soon face not only the harsh natural conditions but also internal crises within the team. However, Mawson continued to demonstrate unwavering determination to reach his goal, deciding to overcome the difficulties of the journey in the name of science and exploration. In this first part, Mawson and his team faced the extreme conditions of Antarctica as they began their survival struggle and scientific journey. Yet Mawson's determination and prior preparation brought him and his team one step closer to success. Douglas Mawson and his team had initially managed to handle the challenges they encountered in the interior of Antarctica. However, no amount of preparation had fully equipped them for the continent's freezing cold, blizzards, and the challenges posed by the heavy loads they had to carry. Before embarking on such a long and difficult journey, Mawson was aware of these obstacles, but none could have foreseen a disaster so great and destructive. The calamity that struck the team would deeply affect them and make the survival struggle even more challenging. After some time, the harsh weather conditions worsened. Snowstorms, rapidly dropping temperatures, and constantly changing weather posed a great threat to the team. As Mawson and his team struggled with each step, they were unexpectedly swept into a massive disaster. Despite being prepared and eager to fulfill their duties, the brutal nature of Antarctica would test them painfully and draw them into a struggle beyond ordinary human limits. During this difficult journey, as Mawson's team progressed deeper into Antarctica, they were faced with misfortunes. One day, an unexpected accident occurred. While returning to camp, a huge ice crack led to the tragic death of two key team members, Xavier Mertz and another researcher. This accident not only resulted in the loss of team members, but also seriously threatened the survival chances of Mawson and the remaining two team members. Mawson was left in shock from the sudden loss of his teammates. Mentally and physically exhausted, he still had to strive to survive alone in his situation. Having lost his team members, he was now forced to bear this disaster as a leader. However, these losses also reduced the food and resources necessary for their survival. Mawson and the surviving members had to continue moving forward in the harsh conditions with limited food. Food and resources rapidly began to deplete. Mawson and the remaining team members were surviving on only a few hundred calories a day. Wearing light clothing and carrying frozen bags, they were expending more energy each day in search of food. With these dwindling resources, their chances of survival were diminishing each passing day. At this point, Mawson's mental strength and leadership skills became critical. As conditions grew more difficult, each individual in the group was physically and mentally exhausted. They decided to head back to camp, but moving through Antarctica's cold, icy valleys became increasingly challenging. Mawson's goal was to save the survivors and, even if alone, reach the camp. However, even making this decision, he had to cope with the fear and uncertainty within him. After a while, Mawson and the only surviving friend found their path growing more complicated. The cold weather, constant storms, and the risk of freezing from their clothing meant that they were at constant risk. The loss of teammates deeply affected them, and it also placed a heavy psychological burden on them. In the harsh environment, they knew that the less food they consumed, the longer they could survive. Mawson, with the surviving dogs, was trying to return to camp, but he was now very weak. At that time, a greater threat emerged for Mawson. During this period of battling hunger in the search for food, Mawson's mind was forced to make a decision. In the deadlock of the survival struggle, he was compelled to eat some of his dogs. This painful decision showed how difficult a psychological battle Mawson was going through and how much pressure he was under to survive. However, this choice was the only glimmer of hope for him to stay alive. Mawson, growing weaker by the day, continued to push forward, struggling to return. His body was exhausted, but his mind and willpower still gave him the courage to keep going. Yet resources were running out, and his chances of survival were growing slimmer. With every step, he exerted more effort to return and escape, fighting for survival in every corner of nature. The team, once strong and resilient, was now reduced to only a few members, highlighting the immense difficulty of the situation. This period, full of hardships and losses, became a time when Mawson's leadership skills and endurance were tested, constantly feeling the line between life and death. Yet these harsh challenges not only tested the survival struggle, but also pushed the limits of the human spirit and determination. Unable to overcome the shock of losing his teammates, Douglas Mawson now found himself alone in the dark, deadly conditions of Antarctica. The only survivor of a disaster, Mawson's strength and will would be put to the ultimate test. This journey, in which he was forced to fight for survival alone, would not only challenge his physical limits, but also his psychological ones. Mawson was alone in the cold, dark world of the abandoned camp. He had very little material left to keep him alive. His food and water had run out, and the loss of his teammates had deeply affected him emotionally. For several days, the thoughts of what he needed to do to survive turned into a mental nightmare. However, his survival instinct pushed him forward, and despite the constant threat of death, he kept moving. Aside from himself and the dogs, no one else remained alive. Mawson's isolation grew heavier with each passing hour, as the cold and snowstorms seemed to wage war against him. His own body had weakened, beginning to decay. The cold numbed parts of his body, and with every step, the pain in his joints and muscles reminded him of how difficult survival had become. He was in such dire conditions that with every step, his body seemed to want to give up, and each passing minute made him feel as though his chances of survival were slipping away. Despite this, Mawson's spirit was still strong enough to keep him alive. Even though his body was physically exhausted, the desire to survive kept him going. Every day, every hour, every minute of the tremendous effort he put into surviving left him in a dire state. At first, loneliness had felt like a nightmare, but over time he had to come to terms with it. Loneliness was not just the silence of the outside world. It was also the depth of the mental state he was in. On one side, he fought to survive, while on the other, the loss of his teammates and the cruel nature of Antarctica filled him with a terrible sense of emptiness. Mawson pushed his body to the limit every day, while also exerting tremendous effort to keep his mind from breaking. The cold, thirst, and hunger posed great threats. With only a few dogs and limited supplies, he had to cover a deadly distance of 320 kilometers. Yet with every step, his battle against hunger and thirst intensified, and there was always a question in his mind about how long and difficult this journey would be. His body was weakening, slowly depleting each day, and the isolation made it all the harder. However, Mawson's survival instinct drove him forward with each step, and his mental determination kept him standing strong. Many times during the journey, he would pause for a moment and begin to think that everything was over. The challenge of traveling such a great distance alone was so difficult that at times, hope for survival would seem to fade completely. But each time, he somehow managed to regroup and find the courage to take one more step. Mawson became an example of how human strength can endure even in the face of immense adversity. Every second, every minute, he fought to stay alive. Loneliness became a major factor affecting Mawson's decisions. Each day spent alone drained his mental resilience. He was forced to kill some of his dogs due to hunger, a decision he made to keep his warrior spirit and desire to survive alive. However, this decision complicated his mental state even further. Eating his beloved companions, those who had helped him, was a situation that tested his physical and mental limits. Nevertheless, each new day allowed him to find a little more hope for survival and strength to keep fighting. Alone, Mawson moved forward slowly, driven by his determination and survival instincts. With every step, his hope and resolve were reignited. In Antarctica's freezing environment, each hour reminded him of how valuable survival was, and every step made him realize how destructive this relentless struggle was. However, there was one thing that kept Mawson alive: his determined fight to keep moving forward, to survive, and to return. While trying to survive alone in the freezing cold of Antarctica, one of the greatest challenges Mawson faced was hunger. With each passing day, food sources dwindled, his body grew weaker, and his mental and emotional resilience slowly faded. However, to survive, Mawson was forced to make a decision beyond anything he had ever considered: to eat the dogs he had trusted and relied on to stay alive. At the beginning of Mawson's expedition, the dogs played a crucial role. They carried the exploration equipment and handled the heavy loads. For Mawson and his team, these dogs had been loyal companions that helped them survive. Their contributions were critical in enabling the team to survive the long and difficult journey. However, for Mawson to survive alone, these animals had become a resource to be sacrificed. Initially, deciding to kill the dogs was an agonizing internal conflict for Mawson. The dogs had not only been pack animals, but had also become loyal companions. Their presence during the journey had provided him with moral support. The bond he shared with them always felt like a friendship. But the hunger he faced forced him to sacrifice these loyal companions in the name of survival. With food running out, the energy needed to return depleted and no other options left, this harsh decision became inevitable. One morning, Mawson, slowly and in agony, decided to cut into one of his frozen dogs in the freezing cold. Doing so left a deep wound in his soul. But there was no other choice. Either he would survive and move forward, or he would slowly die and vanish in this harsh environment. In making this decision, he was not only undergoing a physical trial but also a great mental one. He felt guilty, confronting the fact that he had power over these animals, and with every bite, his sense of conscience grew deeper. Eating the dogs was not just a physical challenge for Mawson, but an emotional trauma as well. This process tested not only his determination to survive, but also his loyalty and sense of responsibility toward the animals. However, a person might have to push any boundary to stay alive. Mawson felt the bond with these loyal companions more with each passing day, and while grateful for their help, he paid a heavy price for eventually having to eat them. Eating his dogs was only one of the painful realities of Mawson's survival struggle. He had to digest this decision, not just physically, but emotionally as well. As he continued to battle hunger and cold in Antarctica's freezing conditions, he also wrestled with the inner turmoil brought on by this decision. On one hand, he loved the dogs, remembering all the sacrifices made to keep them alive, while on the other, he carried the guilt of this betrayal in order to survive. Nevertheless, Mawson's ever-decreasing physical strength meant he had no choice but to continue eating the dogs. With the strength he gained from their flesh, he tried to move forward and continue his journey. In those moments, despite his increasing weakness, the survival instinct provided him with a renewed sense of purpose. While loneliness and hunger wore him down, the difficult decision to keep going and survive gave him just enough strength to endure. After eating the dogs, Mawson continued to fight not only the physical battle, but also the psychological trauma that deepened with each day. The pain of killing the animals made him realize how fragile the balance between humanity and nature truly is. Still, he had done what was necessary to survive, and this decision once again proved his incredibly strong survival instincts. Douglas Mawson had entered a battle with nature's harsh conditions in the freezing desert of Antarctica to stay alive. However, he had to face not only the cold and hunger, but also massive glacial obstacles, snowstorms, and the relentless challenges posed by the climate. These conditions turned into a battle that wore him down not only physically but mentally. A determined and strong person might endure the fight with nature for a longer period, but over time, it became clear how few options he was being given by the harsh and rigid environment around him. As he continued his journey, Mawson had to march across frozen, desolate terrain with each step. There was nothing around him except the endless, white snow and ice. The enormous glacial barriers, with their nearly impossible-to-cross masses, slowed his progress. The slightest slip, fall, or mistake would make survival even more difficult. Each step, each breath was part of Mawson's fight for survival. Yet every aspect of nature seemed to be there to challenge him. As the days passed, Mawson's body gradually began to weaken. Dwindling food supplies and the harsh conditions continued to decrease his chances of survival. He had managed to sustain himself by eating several of his dogs, but food sources were running out. Every day he felt increasing hunger and fatigue, his body growing weaker by the hour. Each ounce of energy he spent trying to move forward only added to the strain on his body. However, his determination to survive drove him to continue. While crossing glaciers, every step meant battling the ever-deepening cold of the ice beneath the surface. With each additional step, it felt as if he were inching closer to a frozen grave. Turning back was impossible. The only option was severe storms became one of the greatest obstacles on Mawson's journey. Snowstorms not only caused him to lose his sense of direction, but also made progress impossible. The snow, combined with the cold winds, presented a constant, deadly threat. When Mawson found himself in the midst of these storms, he was consumed by moments of despair, one after another. As nature relentlessly attacked him, he kept moving forward, driven solely by his survival instinct. Each storm, each cold wave left a mark on his spirit. There were many times when, in this cold and dreadful environment, Mawson fell into pessimism. In those moments he thought everything was over, that nothing was working and that survival had become impossible. Yet inside him, there was a determination to withstand nature's challenges. Somehow, he had to survive, keep moving, and return. Every step while pushing him to his limits also strengthened his resolve, bringing him one step closer to his goal. However, each physical and psychological barrier he encountered during this journey was the result of a greater force, a willpower. Despite constantly facing death, Mawson never gave up. He kept pushing himself forward with every step. It became clear that it wasn't just his body's responses that kept him alive, but an inner strength. He had discovered that strength. His determination to survive and the resolve within him allowed him to continue his battle against nature on his own. He was going through not only a physical, but also a mental trial. The cold, hunger, and isolation were factors that could threaten a person's sanity. However, Mawson kept his determination intact despite every adversity. By battling snowstorms, glaciers, and every challenge, he moved forward step by step. As he tested his limits, he showed how a human could resist nature's fiercest challenges and survive. Mawson's determination not only reinforced his physical endurance, but also solidified his hope and desire to survive. In the fight for survival, he had to battle not only nature's merciless conditions but also his own mental strength. Every new day he mentally renewed himself to take one more step. This grueling battle proved that he possessed a powerful human spirit, capable of withstanding even the harshest conditions. After 32 days of a terrifying fight for survival, Douglas Mawson finally managed to return to his camp. During this period, every step had been a journey fraught with tremendous difficulty and risk. Mawson's body had been severely weakened by hunger, cold, and fatigue, and his spirit had come dangerously close to death. But his extraordinary resolve in the face of nature's cruelty gave him the strength to take one more step. As his physical limits shrank each day, his survival instinct and strong will pushed him one step further. At the beginning of his journey, Mawson moved forward with an inner strength and desire to survive with every step. But this journey became a process where the mind and body constantly challenged each other. As he progressed, he felt everything becoming harder, yet every new difficulty presented another opportunity to survive. Even in his hardest moments, he kept taking slow and determined steps. In the end, after overcoming the freezing cold, sharp winds, and difficult terrain, he began to see the first glimmer of hope as he neared his camp. The 32 days Mawson spent in the wild were a constant battle for survival, where every moment brought him face to face with death. There were many times when he reached the brink, almost ready to give up, but each time he rediscovered the strength within himself. During those moments, alone, he questioned the meaning of his fight for survival. In his mind, on one side, there was death and despair, while on the other side there was an unwavering desire and determination to survive. In the end, he forced his body to keep moving. Physically, Mawson was extremely weak. His body was drained, and his hands and feet had frozen, yet somehow he managed to reach his camp. However, upon his return, Mawson's health was poor. His body had been worn down by hunger, cold, and exhaustion, but he had survived. The other members of the expedition had died, and he was the only one to make it back. Despite his fatigue and weakness, the world rejoiced at his survival after such a heroic fight for life. Mawson's battle for survival was not only a physical challenge, but it also became a psychological war. When faced with nature's relentless conditions, however, this grueling experience showed him that the power to survive wasn't just a matter of the body. An inner determination, willpower, and strong resolve compelled him to hold on to life. When Mawson returned to camp, he became the only person to survive the expedition, making history. The scientific community admired this incredible survival story. Mawson's exceptional determination and resilience made him not just an explorer, but a symbol of the endurance of the human spirit. Remaining faithful to the memory of his fallen teammates, he became the only person to successfully complete the scientific exploration and survive, cementing his place in history. This expedition was not just a struggle against the forces of nature. It was also a symbol of discovering the strength and will within the human spirit. Mawson's survival story was not just a personal achievement, but also an example of how humanity can endure and thrive through determination. His resilience, ability to face nature, and capacity to push human limits solidified this expedition's place in history. By the end of the expedition, Mawson had gained not only a physical victory, but also a profound mental triumph. His battle with nature and the fight for survival, combined with his inner resolve, were etched into history. This incredible survival story turned Mawson into not just an explorer, but also a hero who pushed the limits of the human spirit. He became the protagonist of one of the greatest survival sagas in human history, fighting nature and surviving